Hi. What is being described here is not a routine clash at sea. It is the image of a total naval wipeout in one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz, where amid a limited exchange can shake global energy markets, military planning, regional stability in a matter of course. The hot step detail is the skill that claimed more than 120 Iranian vessels damaged or sunk, submarines tend to be gone, ports crippled, miners set hunted down and down, and the entire surface fleet reduced to relevance. If it were fully verified, this would not be a tactical success story. It would be a strategic earthquake. And the deeper pressure point starts right there because the claim the sweeping does not just die bitfold the tri-battlefield disruption. It raised the far bigger question of whether the region has already crossed the frontiers into outright war, with consequences that would not stay contained for long. The first thing that stands out is the speed and totally being projected. Two Garrus strike groups, aircraft launching in rapid cycles, destroyers firing Tomahawks, pilots moving from one target to the next while even circling back to watch the image. That language matters. It is more around momentum, shock, and saturation. The message is not simply that Iran was hit. The message is that Iran was overwhelmed before it could react, and that is where the narrative becomes heavier. Because the military meaning of such an operation would go far beyond ships being destroyed. It was signaled that Iran's ability to nearby waters, lay mines, protect coastal approaches, and trade in shipping lanes had been broken at a source. Thought simply, this is no longer a minor detail. The real concern lies in the consequence behind it. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another patch of water, it is one of the world's most sensitive maritime choke points. Any claim of a full-scale destruction of Iran's naval force there immediately touches oil flows, insurance costs, commercial shipping routes, full-scale, and the risk calculations of either state with farther trade tied to the Gulf. That is why the description of mine layers and ammunition deposits matters so much. Mines in that corridor are not a side issue. They are one of the most dangerous asymmetric tools available in the confined waterway. So when the narrative emphasizes hunting mine facilities and flow assets, it is really pointing to something larger, not just stabilizing ships bullying stuff is what the area means to disrupt the area itself, but that is still not the main issue. The problem is that this account is presented with sweeping certainty while official verification based on publicly available information is the tip. The first that was deficient with this first, and the gap matters because the more dramatic the claim, the more serious the burden of proof. Saying a fleet has seized the extent of the fighting force is not a small statement. It implies that regional military balance has been redrawn in real time. It implies command structures, logistic networks, port capacity, and deterrence credibility have all been set or tabler in the woods. The surface and not the whole story. Behind the explosions and lynch squinches sits a much harder question. If Iran's naval posture were truly broken on this scale, what comes next? Does the pressure stop at sea, or does it move to missile proxies, sabotage, cyber retaliation, and attacks that widen the battlefield instead of ending it? That is where the tension really begins. Because when one side is portrayed as having lost nearly everything in one domain, the risk is not only collapse, the risk is escalation through every channel still available. And that is exactly why this kind of a can demand scrutiny, not just sentiment. If the claim is exaggerated, the distortion itself is dangerous. If any meaningful part of it is true, the consequences are even bigger than the spectacle. Either way, the deeper issue is the same. Odds of confrontation in Hormuz is framed as annihilation rather than pursuit. The threshold for the next move be confrontation in Hormuz. And this is where the story becomes even more dangerous because the military choreography being described is not just about the story, it is about tempo, endurance, and the ability to keep striking until the R side cannot recover. Repeated launch cycles, the fast turnarounds below deck, the resupply by helicopter, the logging of fuel weapons and maintenance, all of that is there for one reason, to show that this was forced the first. But a stand machine designed to keep pressure on while pals, that detail matters because wars are not decided by one dramatic hit alone. They are decided by who can keep operating while the other side is being stripped of time, mobility, and options. In that sense, the most revealing part is not even the missile launch. It is the claim that the cycle never stopped it. That becomes the camera of the picture. The meaning changes. This is no longer just a tale of ships under attack. It becomes a statement about industrial-scale military rhythm. where one side is portrayed as able to launch, recover, repair, reload, and strike again faster than the other side can hide, disperse, or reorganize. That is a far more severe message. It suggests not merely local superiority, but operational suffocation, and if that reading is even barely accurate, then the pressure on Iran would not end with burning holes in the water. It would move straight into command confidence, coastal defense posture, and the credibility of every threat Iran has used for years to shape the behavior of stronger powers. The problem is that this is only the surface. The deeper issue is what such a narrative does to the logic of deterrence itself. Iran's naval power in the Gulf has long mattered not because they could defeat the United States in a conventional sea battle, but because they could impose cost, uncertainty, uncertain in Iraq, vital corridor, speedboats, mines, coastal threats, drones, harassment tactics, dispersed assets, all of that forms part of a strategy built around friction rather than symmetrical strength. So when the cannon says those tools were smashed comprehensively and continuously, it is not simply describing losses, it is declaring the failure of an entire method of regional pressure. That is a huge claim, and huge claims create huge strategic questions, because if a state's most accessible pressure lever is removed or shown to be vulnerable, the next response may come from places that are harder to predict and harder to contend. Put simply, the battlefield does not stay where the cameras are pointed. If the ceiling becomes too costly to contest directly, then the incentive shifts elsewhere: missile proxy networks, infrastructure threats, cyber disruption, the Naval acts, or calibrated retaliation aimed at producing fear while emitting an elephant. That is why any triumphant reading here should be treated with caution. Apparent dominance can solve one military problem while opening 5 political ones. More importantly, a narrative with total destruction can corner decision makers on all sides. For one side, it creates pressure to prove the victory was decisive. For the other, it creates pressure to prove it is not broken. And that kind of pressure is exactly how conflicts stop being limited. Wacomness made the picture even heavier, at least in strategic terms. The description ends with the idea that Iran's fleet ceased to exist as a fighting force, but even if a fleet is degraded, that does not automatically mean the crisis is contained. Sometimes it means the opposite. Sometimes it means the visible layer has been crushed, while the less visible layer becomes more likely, more relational, and more dangerous. That is the contradiction sitting underneath the entire account. Overwhelming firepower may destroy assess. It does not automatically destroy motive, grievance, or capacity for retaliation in another form. And that is the larger unresolved question now hanging over everything. If the naval balance was shattered, did that make the region suffer? Or did it simply push the confrontation into darker channels that are to track before they erupt? And that is the point no one should treat lightly. When a confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz is framed as total destruction, this anger is no longer just what was hit. This anger is what that kind of pressure can trigger next. Ships can be sunk, boats can be crippled, but the wider crisis does not end the moment the firing stops. In many cases, that is when the next phase begins. And that is why this story matters for beyond the battlefield image absolve. The real test is not who looked dominant for a moment. The real test is whether this pushes the region closer to a wider and more unpredictable confrontation. Stay with this story, watch the claim carefully, and judge every new development against the facts, because the hardest consequences often are over the loudest headle. Youst!